Aloha and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to day one of our conference, Advancing Women, Peace, and Security in the Indo-Pacific, hosted by Pacific Forum and U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Office of Women, Peace, and Security. My name is Ariel Stenek, and I'm Director of Pacific Forum's Young Leaders Program. Pacific Forum Vice President Crystal Pryor had planned on chairing this conference. However, her own Labor Day came a little earlier than expected. So in her stead, I'm pleased to be chairing this conference together with my colleagues, Rob York, Director for Regional Affairs, and Tevi Bullock, one of our resident Women, Peace, and Security Fellows. This event is a big milestone in what has been an exciting and humbling partnership with the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Office of Women, Peace, and Security, highlighting the incredible importance of women's unique contributions to peace and security globally. Over the past year, we've hosted numerous virtual events that have addressed women's leadership in the defense sector, women's leadership through COVID-19, the pivotal roles women play to facilitate military, civilian, medical support, how women protect communities and economies in coastal Southeast Asia, and most recently, an event on women's suffrage in the Indo-Pacific. Pacific Forum, as U.S. Secretariat for the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia Pacific, also introduced, with our co-chairs Indonesia and New Zealand, the first ever Women, Peace, and Security, or also known as WPS, study group to this Track 2 dialogue process. It's been an ambitious year, so we're excited to celebrate our achievements through this conference. Today and tomorrow, we will bring together WPS experts from around the world to address a wide range of critical security issues through a gender lens. Our two-day hybrid conference will cover topics such as promoting WPS in the defense sector with allies and partners, building bridges between civil society organizations and local government, cultivating a culture of allyship in security, COVID-19's impacts on gender equality, gender and countering violent extremism, and gender and climate security in the Indo-Pacific. More broadly, this conference will affirm the importance of the global WPS agenda, which calls for women's full and equal participation in the maintenance and promotion of international peace and security. You can find a detailed agenda in our virtual conference booklet, which can be accessed through the link that is going to be shared in the chat box. This conference booklet also provides bios for our expert panelists and moderators who will be speaking over the next 2 days. As you will see, we will move straight into session 2, which is cultivating a culture of allyship and security, after a keynote address from Dr. Valerie Hudson. I'd like to note that remarks made in today's program are on the record, and a recording of the session will be made available on Pacific Forum's website and Pacific Forum and Indo-PACOM's YouTube channels in the future. Also, this conference is a public webinar, which means that there are individuals joining the event virtually who are not visible to the panelists and participants. Participants are welcome to keep their cameras off or on during the conference proceedings. Before we begin this morning's sessions, it is my honor to share recorded welcome remarks from Lieutenant General Stephen Sklenka, Deputy Commander, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. General Sklenka is a combat veteran, having deployed in support of 8 U.S. military operations from the Pacific, Central, and Southern Command areas of responsibility. During his nearly 33 years of distinguished service, he has held numerous noteworthy positions, most recently as the Principal Director for South and Southeast Asia in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and J5 Director for Strategic Planning and Policy, United States Indo-Pacific Command. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Lieutenant General Sklenka's opening address.
Hi, it's my distinct privilege and honor to be here today to speak with you regarding the critical conversation of women, peace, and security. I certainly wish I could be there in person, but schedules are not allowing it, and the team was gracious enough to provide me this venue by which I could address this distinct audience. This is the first and certainly not the last of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command's co-hosted conference of its kind, where we comprehensively covered women, peace, and security within the region. I'm going to give a special thank you to the Pacific Forum for partnering with us regarding this important and always timely topic. Thank you to all who have taken their time from their very busy schedules to be a part of this conference. especially Dr. Valerie Hudson, distinguished professor and George H.W. Bush Chair at the Bush School of Government at Texas A&M University, who will be providing the keynote address, as well as the many other distinguished speakers, panelists, and audience members. Your collective insights and perspectives are important to advancing this important work together. Now, over the next 2 days, we'll hear from defense practitioners, civil society organizations, and academics to expand our knowledge regarding how we can create more meaningful security solutions through a whole of society and a whole of government approach. Women, peace, and security is a national security imperative. And in order to address the challenges of our complex security environment, we're striving to develop a better understanding of the common, yet often invisible thread that's woven into every intersection of the security challenges and opportunities that we face today. And that thread, of course, is gender. Now, the truth is we can't afford to let history repeat itself again and again by overlooking half of the population, by failing to meaningfully include women within the security landscape. This is our national security imperative. Societies that include and invest in their entire population in responding to disasters, in countering crime, in preventing violent extremism, in defending against internal and external threats. They'll be safer, they'll be more secure, and they'll be more prosperous. And the evidence is overwhelming. Women play a critical role in both achieving and sustaining security, stability, peace, and prosperity. Peace agreements are 35% more likely to last at least 15 years when women are involved. And that really is considerable when you think about the average peace agreement lasting less than 5 years. Additionally, when women are involved in peace processes, those processes are 64% less likely to fail. And this is the heart of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security that was passed nearly 21 years ago, addressing the disproportionate and unique impact of armed conflict and crisis on women and girls, but also recognizing the importance of women's equal and full participation as active agents in peace and security. Now, this resolution fundamentally broadens the definition of security by expanding who can become and who will be our capable and reliable security allies and partners. And women expand our understanding of what truly makes us secure. Their perspectives improve how we provide security that is both effective and sustainable. UN Security Council Resolution 1325 is also a global call to action. And many nations, governments, and civil society alike made investments and commitments to advancing women, peace, and security over the last 2 decades. But the defense and security sectors have been behind, and it's time to catch up. U.S. Department of Defense and U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Women, Peace, and Security approach includes for the defense sector implementing UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which means ensuring that women are equally and meaningfully engaged in every space where conversations and decisions about peace and security are being made, and that gender considerations are included across our military analysis, planning, operations, assessments, and exercises to optimize our desired effects. It's important to recognize gender as a key characteristic of the operational environment and to use this knowledge to inform mission planning. We cannot be in the business of providing security if we don't understand that men, women, boys, girls, and gender minorities all have different security needs, and they're affected in different ways by conflict and crisis. Their different roles and responsibilities mean that they end up in harm's way differently. They're targeted differently, and they have different access to relief and recovery resources. And you'll hear more about these specific gendered impacts in sessions 5, 6, and 7 tomorrow, which further explore women, peace, and security, and violent extremism, COVID-19, and climate security. Now, for the U.S. military, the Department of Defense has identified 3 primary objectives in its Women, Peace, and Security Strategic Framework and Implementation Plan to implement and institutionalize women, peace, and security over time. Our first objective focuses on improving our own defense sector. It looks internally at how we can better engage women meaningfully in our own organizations and in the employment of our forces. But at the same time we're doing this work at home, we want to encourage our allies and partners abroad to work alongside us to ensure that women can meaningfully serve at all ranks, in all occupations, and in every capacity within defense and security sectors around the world. That's the focus of our second objective. Our third objective focuses on protection by working to keep women and girls safe and ensuring their human rights are protected, especially during conflict and crisis. Additionally, applying a gender perspective helps the military better understand the security concerns of the entire population. It helps reduce potential gender blind spots and it helps identify the full range of risks, resources, and opportunities available to us. It also helps ensure our forces are used to our maximum potential by including the right mix of people in planning or deployments, ultimately to achieve mission success. Now, at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, we consider women, peace, and security to be a smart power capability, supporting a free and open Indo-Pacific. Women, peace, and security promotes the values and norms desired by all people: dignity, human rights, and equality under the law. We've established an Office of Women, Peace, and Security within our J9 Pacific Outreach Directorate that includes 4 full-time personnel led by our Command Gender Advisor. Their efforts focus on institutionalization by integrating women, peace, and security principles throughout U.S. Indo-PACOM's strategies, plans, operations, activities, and investments, and developing more inclusive security strategies. They work internal engagements to strengthen our allies and partners. They work tailored education, training, defense, and security for personnel, U.S. and partner nations. And they work pioneering women, peace, and security defense research, analysis, and monitoring and evaluation efforts to ensure we are meeting our desired outcomes. This year's Indo-Pacific Chiefs of Defense Conference, hosted by Admiral Aquilino, devoted an entire keynote session to the role of women, peace, and security in advancing our shared security objectives and increasing our most important resource, human capital. Defense chiefs from around the region noted the importance of female leadership in senior security positions and the necessity of female role models to inspire the next generation. Encouraging workforce diversity was one of the 3 key outcomes that the participants agreed to at the end of the conference. At U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, we often say that implementing women, peace, and security is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. And as we better understand how to address regional gender-based challenges, we're able to develop more holistic, human-centered approaches to security within the Indo-Pacific. And this brings us to the purpose of why we are here today. First, we can't do this alone. Advancing women, peace, and security requires the investment, it requires the commitment, and requires the resourcing from all of us across all sectors of global society. Secondly, we understand that this requires transparency and the building of trust. And I look forward to hearing open dialogue and honest perspectives over the next couple of days, especially lessons learned, challenges experienced, and successes experienced. Thirdly, we have a lot to learn from you, particularly from other partner nations and civil society organizations that are here with us today. And lastly, we recognize that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. There's no magic formula, and this isn't easy. No nation has this completely figured out, not yet anyway. We're all at different points in our respective journeys in women, peace, and security implementation. But we start by having dialogues like these, by pulling on that thread of gender more and more, by making it more visible, and by responding with concrete actions. At U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, we look forward to exploring new avenues of cooperation in women, peace, and security across the region. And I look forward to advancing women, peace, and security alongside you, because I believe we are investing in our own human resilience. We're investing in our future. Thank you.
My thanks to General Sklenka for setting a tone of earnestness and focusing on the importance of the WPS agenda for international peace and security. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Valerie Hudson. Dr. Hudson is the University Distinguished Professor in the Department of International Affairs at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University, where she directs the program on women, peace, and security. In addition to authoring several seminal books on gender and security, Dr. Hudson was named one of the top 100 most influential global thinkers by Foreign Policy in 2009. She is also a co-founder of the Women's Stats Project and Database, the largest compilation of information on the status of women around the world today. It is an honor to have her here with us today and at a very important time for the WPS agenda. Dr. Hudson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation. I am so grateful to be here and to address you today. I only wish we had time for Q&A, but another time. I cannot imagine a more serious occasion for reflection on the women, peace, and security agenda than what we've seen take place in Kabul in August 2021. Women were a central part of the rationale for invasion in 2001. Though by no means a priority, women were one focus of programming in the 20 years that followed. At least in the general vicinity of Kabul, women were fairly free, and there were impressive changes, such as the 25% quota for women in the Loya Jirga, the steep decreases in maternal and infant mortality, the steep increase in school enrollment for girls. There were many symbols of this progress for women, such as the award-winning Afghan girls robotics team. Now, of course, many members of that team have fled the country, and they have all been given scholarships at some of the best Western universities. But there were some who were not able to leave, and now they have a bright target painted on them, a target the West helped paint. Though she was not on the team, a 22-year-old woman named Aisha Ahmad penned a letter on 24 August as Kabul was falling. She had tried for days to reach the airport and was unsuccessful, and now she knows she is trapped in the city. She has never really known life under the Taliban. She was only 2 when the Americans invaded. This is what she wrote. Are Afghan women doomed to extinction? Women were among the most deprived and restricted sections of Afghan society for many years, but the defeat of the Taliban in 2001 heralded the possibility of a brighter future. It ignited a spark of hope for a freer and more prosperous life. It breathed empowerment into our souls. The flame of our confidence started to grow bigger, stronger. In the years since, our new generation of women has engaged in a continual struggle to change society's perception of us and to break our bonds. We have achieved so much. We had achieved so much. The Taliban's return to domination of our country has returned pain and hopelessness to the lives of women. It struck us like a thunderbolt, reducing our 20 years of achievement to ashes, laid waste our aspirations. We have been cast back out of sight, alone with only darkness in our future, no window of hope. Our biggest fear is that if the world recognizes the Taliban, their oppression and barbarism against us will be institutionalized, set in stone for generations. The international community must insist the Taliban restore and uphold the fundamental rights of Afghan women at this critical juncture and lift us from our descent into misery. 10 years ago, Hillary Clinton told a group of female Afghan ministers, "We will not abandon you. We will stand with you always." Will the world and the US fail or abandon these commitments? We are human, not just pictures on your screen. Afghan women are women. We have hopes and dreams, just like your own mother, your own sisters, your own daughters, just like you. Now I read that letter and I weep until I get to the part where Aisha says the West must insist the Taliban restore and uphold the fundamental rights of Afghan women. And then I just shake my head. For clearly 20 years of being in Afghanistan and working on behalf of women did not bring about widespread cultural change in that country. And the international community will not be able to insist on anything of the sort. Indeed, this has been a subject of ridicule by American pundits. In the US, there is a journalist named Tucker Carlson, who is very popular in some circles. This is what he had to say about the Western project to help Afghan women. And I'm going to put my finger up just so that you know it's not me talking. Over the past 20 years, Congress has allocated close to $1 billion to export academic feminism to Afghanistan. Where did that money go? It went to programs like a 2-year master's degree in gender and women's studies offered at Kabul University, something Afghans apparently never knew they needed. Another US government effort funded, quote, activities that educate and engage Afghan men and boys to challenge gender stereotypes. Right, like they weren't doing that enough. American funded gender advisors demanded women comprise at least 10% of the Afghan National Army and a still larger proportion of that country's political leadership. Thanks to American imposed gender quotas, dozens of women ultimately were installed as representatives in Afghan's parliament. How did that work? Well, the whole thing was a sham, as always. Almost nobody in Afghanistan liked any of this, by the way, and why would they? As one USAID official conceded in a classified report, quote, focusing on gender made things more unstable because it caused revolts. It caused revolts, but officials kept doing it. They kept pushing radical gender politics anyway because they could. This is the face of the late American empire. Gender studies seminars at gunpoint. Since Kabul has just fallen, it might be worth asking the most obvious question of all. Why did the Taliban win? How did the 6th century triumph over the 21st? One of those answers may be that the population of Afghanistan has firmly rejected what our leaders were selling it for over 20 years. It turns out the people of Afghanistan don't actually want gender studies symposia. They don't hate their own masculinity. They don't think it's toxic. They like the patriarchy. So now they're getting it all back. So maybe it's possible we failed in Afghanistan because the entire program is grotesque. It's a joke. It's contrary to human nature. It answers none of our deepest human desires. It's merely a performance stage for the performers. It's not even supposed to improve your life. It's ridiculous. And ideas that ridiculous can only be imposed by force, only with armed men at gunpoint. The moment these ideas are not mandatory, the second the troops withdraw, people tend to revert to the lives they prefer to live. That may be the real lesson of Afghanistan. Now, of course, it's clear that Aisha Ahmad does not prefer to live the way the Taliban would like her to live, and she does not think it ridiculous to hold that preference. So Carlson is being shamefully glib in his conclusions. But allow me to modify Carlson's challenge to be more on point to our meeting today. The questions I want to ask you are imperative for the WPS community to address. And they include, does Kabul mean that WPS is just a performative joke? Did the West actually harm the nation of Afghanistan and harm the women of Afghanistan by opening the doors to education and politics for them? And more broadly, was this effort a failure? These are the hard questions that we in the WPS community must ask forthrightly. A little tangent here. I note parenthetically that Kabul also prompts me to ask other questions about things like deterrence and threat response and the difference WPS could make there. For example, I believe a WPS lens is uniquely capable of improving and strengthening post-deterrence planning. Indeed, the female experience is often centered on post-deterrence, as women are often unable to deter aggressors intent on harming them. It's time to jettison the idea that robust post-deterrence planning undermines deterrence. While the stakes in Kabul are high, the likely stakes in East Asia for post-deterrence planning failures are going to be even higher. That's something for Indo-PACOM to consider seriously and with a WPS lens. Back to the Carlson questions. The one that is easiest to address is whether the West harmed the nation of Afghanistan by improving the situation of women in that country. The evidence is clear and copious that one of the reasons Afghanistan is such a mess is because the real power structure of the society are male bonded kin groups. Such a power structure bears an almost one-to-one correspondence with the worst possible outcomes for a nation, including great internal conflict, weak central government, egregious corruption, poor economic indicators, and awful health indicators. If you leave a society in thrall to male bonded kin groups, your nation has an astronomical risk of becoming a failed state. The US Department of Defense funded my research group to undertake a comprehensive empirical analysis of these linkages. And the evidence is about as conclusive as you can possibly get in social science research. So while I am sure the male bonded kin groups of Afghanistan were not happy about the elevation of women's situation in some Afghan cities, any impartial observer will tell you that such an elevation only improved the possibilities for Afghanistan. Not even Tucker Carlson could argue, could he, that an almost five-fold reduction in Afghan maternal mortality was not good for the nation of Afghanistan. And that impartial observer would also point out that the more proximate causes of the fall of the Ghani government was not in women's rights, but in the terrible corruption and ineffective governance it represented. Can you imagine if the elevation of women had been undertaken by an uncorrupt, effective government? We wouldn't even be having this conversation if it had, because the government would not have fallen. A government has to be pretty awful to be a worse alternative than the Taliban. And the Karzai and Ghani governments were that awful, in my opinion. So this leads us to the question about whether the last 20 years of programming for women was a performative joke on our part. To be honest, I think some of it was. As Patricia Lytle and I detail in our book, The Hillary Doctrine, which has an entire chapter on Afghanistan. There were problems from ill-conceived programs, Bees for Widows, to programs that were never actually carried out, which would have made a difference, like land titles for women, to programs that would have made a difference if the subcontractors running them were not also running brothels as a side gig. Yes, a lot of the programming was a mess that was meant to hit the right burn rate to keep the money flowing. And the only M&E done was tasked to the entity performing the programming, which is a recipe for disaster. It's time for the WPS community to stand up against this type of lame performative theater. But it must be noted these problems affected all Western aid in Afghanistan, not simply that targeted to women. But I would argue that many of the gains were not a joke. They were meaningful and they were important. We've already spoken about the significant drops in maternal mortality, and we must also mention the greater access to healthcare for Afghan women who under the Taliban were largely denied such access. We saw impressive gains for women's school enrollment from primary to secondary to even tertiary levels. We saw women mayors, women judges, even women police chiefs. Even if rare, just seeing women in such positions or seeing them in the Loya Jirga changed the horizon of possibility for all Afghans. These women, by and large, performed their duties with distinction. Afghans even saw women run for president of their country. You cannot believe what you cannot see, and you cannot unseen what you have seen. And this is where my fears and my hopes converge. Yes, I do fear that we have painted a target on these women's backs, and many will be killed. They have already been killed month by month, even long before Kabul was lost. The journalists, the judges, the police women, even the first woman pilot in the Afghan Air Force fled Afghanistan, not because of the Taliban, but because of her own extended family who felt shamed by her choices and threatened her life. Male bonded kin groups don't have to be Taliban to oppress women. But there is something else I think of, which gives me hope that it was not a joke. It wasn't a failure either. All of this effort wasn't about us in the West, despite what Carlson says. It was about them. It was about Afghan women. Remember, Aisha and other young women her age have never lived under the Taliban. In fact, almost 65% of Afghan's population is under 25 and do not remember the days of the Taliban. 20 years is an entire generation of time. These women will never think like the Taliban hopes they will. But going further, Aisha is the daughter of a woman who would have been educated under the communist regime, granddaughter of a woman who would have been educated under the Khan regime, and perhaps even the great-granddaughter of a woman who would have been educated under King Amanullah's rule. In other words, the longer story of women's rights in Afghanistan shows that the Taliban can subordinate the women, but it can never defeat them. Because in the quiet of a mother's embrace will also come vision, courage, and determination. Aisha will educate her daughters in secret and tell them of what life could be, of what life was for them before the Taliban. And remember, 2021 is different. Cell phones are now fairly ubiquitous in Afghanistan, and so are radio and television. I do not believe the Taliban will ever defeat Afghan women. Pashtana Durrani, executive director of Learn Afghanistan, who is now in hiding, has vowed that she will, quote, raise an army just like the Taliban did, only mine will be of educated, determined Afghan women, unquote. When I hear those words, I think of the bonsai tree, how even though the gardener thinks he controls it, the tree has an indomitable will of its own and will strive with all its might to break free of that control, and how every one of the seeds it bears are ready and waiting to be large, non-bonsai trees if given the opportunity. And I believe there are also some Afghan men, especially of the younger generation, who did in fact, quote, challenge their gender stereotypes, unquote, and who will be these women's allies. I know because some of them are my former students. I don't have rose-colored glasses. The victories will be unseen, even hidden on purpose. The defeats and the bloodshed may be very public. It really is now in the hands of Afghan women, and those are capable hands. But make no mistake, the international community still has a vital role to play. Just yesterday, for example, the UN Security Council passed a resolution, albeit with abstentions by China and Russia, about Afghanistan, and we must be asking ourselves what role the UN could play in the future. But even more especially, the international community must invest now in the new Afghan diaspora, particularly its women, for they are an important source of hope for the future of their country. What you do to your women, you do to your nation. No country can escape that iron law, and certainly not Afghanistan. In closing, there is someone whose name I want you to know as well, Hosi Sahibzada. She was 24 when she was killed in 2010 in Kandahar, where she worked on a USAID project teaching local women basic literacy and numeracy. My co-author Patricia Lytle interviewed her a year before her murder. Sahibzada explained that though she was terrified, quote, "I do this for no other reason than because I believe that the only hope for my country lies in its women," unquote. She was right. She is right. The only hope for Afghanistan lies in its women. Women, peace, security. This is the foundation, and this is where we must stand, no matter who laughs, no matter who ignores, no matter who shoots, no matter how long the road. This meeting today is a testament to that. Thank you very much for giving me this time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hudson, for your powerful and insightful words as we're all watching with astonishment of what is happening on the other side of the world. You asked all of us to consider difficult key questions, including, does Kabul mean WPS is just a performative joke? And you highlighted that despite progress that has been made on women's rights and gender equality, there remains a threat of regression, and all of the international community must collectively engage and invest in women to achieve these critical goals. What you do to your women, you do to your nation, and I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. Thus, you also highlighted the unique capabilities of the WPS agenda, which must be harnessed in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond to strengthen stability and protect the courageous, talented women who now have targets on their backs. Thank you for the challenge, and we will carry these words with us throughout this conference. We will now move immediately into session 2, Cultivating a Culture of Allyship and Security. I'm pleased to hand control over to my co-chair, Rob York. Rob, over to you.
Thank you, Ariel. I'm Rob York, Director of Regional Affairs at the Pacific Forum. Welcome to session 2, Cultivating a Culture of Allyship in Security. Over the next 90 minutes, our panelists will discuss best allyship practices in pursuing the goals of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda and explore where support from different groups matters and when it is most important. Please note that remarks made in today's program are on the record, and a video and audio recording of the session will be made available on the Pacific Forum website and Pacific Forum's and Indo-PACOM's YouTube channels in the future. Today's conference is a public webinar, which means there are individuals joining the event virtually who are not visible to the conference panelists and participants. Participants are welcome to keep their camera off or on during conference proceedings. We'd like to remind our speakers to keep their presentations to 10 minutes max, so we can have ample time for questions and discussions. You may find a detailed agenda of our past sessions in our virtual conference booklet, which can be accessed via the link being sent to the chat box now. This conference booklet also provides detailed biographic information on all panelists and moderators involved in our event. For the Q&A, participants are encouraged to raise their hand or submit questions via the chat or Q&A box and can do so at any time during the talks. To begin session 2, Cultivating a Culture of Allyship and Security, I would like to introduce our moderator, Ms. Corey Fleiser. Ms. Fleiser is a national security policy analyst with Booz Allen Hamilton. She currently supports the Joint Chiefs of Staff by providing technical subject matter expertise on implementing the U.S. Women, Peace, and Security Act. Ms. Fleiser, please take it away.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Rob, and greetings from a very rainy Washington, D.C. right now. It is my pleasure to introduce the 3 speakers for this session, a session on cultivating allyship in a security sector institution that I am just super incredibly passionate and honored to moderate. I'll only provide a brief bio for each of the panelists, but I would encourage all the the participants to check out some of the additional information about our super expertise and esteemed speakers within the virtual conference booklet. So I'm going to jump right into it because it's going to be an action-packed panel. And I want to introduce our first speaker, who is Mr. Bruce Mcfarland. And Mr. Mcfarland is the USAID Senior Development Advisor to U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. Mr. Mcfarland, I'm going to give it over to you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Corey. And, thank you to Dr. Hudson. It's a very challenging situation that we had in Afghanistan. And her remarks kind of reminded me of what the extreme of our endeavor is like. Very quickly, I just talk about what USAID is trying to do. What we're trying to do is accelerate a country on their own pathway to development. We have a theory of change that says that if a government embraces their sovereign responsibility, is responsive to their citizens, and operates within the rule of law and the rules-based order, and is a responsible and inclusive member of the family of nations, then it's going to be prosperous and it's going to be a peaceful society. And so that's what's underlying what our approach is. And again, in thinking of Dr. Hudson's powerful remarks, it's absolutely impossible to do any of that without including women substantially within those societies and within those economies and within those governments. And so the issue that we have in USAID is, when I said all that, then what USAID really is trying to do is we're trying to engage the full panorama of human endeavor within a country context. The health, the education, the agriculture, economy, the growth, climate, environment, everything of that nature. In order to do that, in order to get that theory of change moving, what it means is we have to make catalytic investments. We have to help a country on their own pathway. We've learned this lesson the hard way a long time ago. If they're not engaged, if they're not committed to how they're moving forward, it's very difficult to move it. But when they are engaged and when they're fully committed to it, and that's part of our program, is trying to help that level of commitment, then we have opportunities. But those opportunities are still limited by what we can do to influence that. So it's catalytic investments that we need to make. And when we make those catalytic investments, what we're looking for within that complex panorama that I just talked about is, what are the levers that you can pull that have the biggest knock-on effect to the entire society? And one of those levers, in fact, I would probably argue the main lever, is gender. When you include women in the governance systems, in the economic systems, throughout the entire society, if you fully include them, the knock-on effect is huge. It affects every sector of that society, and it affects it positively, and it can move things forward. When we can't fully engage, then we're limited in our effects in other areas. And I think we can come up with a few examples now of where that happens. So it's incredibly important. There's other areas that are also important, levers that we need to pull, such as, sorry, my mind just went blank, such as the areas of, isn't that interesting? Lost my thought. But anyhow, the point is that we need to do that, and it's important. If we don't do that, we end up with a sub-optimization model. So we've seen a lot of statistics about how if you include women, an easy example is if you include women into a corporate governance board, that actually the revenue increases between 10 and 20% if you include them equitably within that corporate governance board. So we see all these examples, and what we know is that if we don't include it right, that society cannot reach its full potential. So with that, I would like to move a little bit into a personal example. So I'm sitting there saying, oh, hey, USAID's got this. We do gender analysis in every program. We incorporate it into everything that we do. But here's another example. I was on a promotion board and promotion panel. And part of the training that you get when you do your promotion panels is they tell you about issues such as gender and things like that when you're assessing your the people in your organization for promotion. And I thought, USA, we got this. We're 53% women. Most of my career, majority of bosses I've worked for have been women. It's like, this is good. I was absolutely amazed when we saw the statistics of what was actually happening and what I thought was, and it is a very sophisticated organization that embraces gender issues. And what it turns out is that in our promotion statistics, women are penetrating the glass ceiling, but it's a high kurtosis. It's very peaked. We do a lot with data and everything in our analysis. And women are penetrating it, but what they're not doing is we're not creating that broad base. So whereas we have women in our apex positions, a lot of highly qualified women in our apex positions, we're focusing on exceptionalism. We're looking for those exceptional people that are moving forward, and women have to be more exceptional in order to do that. And what we're not doing is creating that broad base. And what comes to mind is that if you're sitting on a promotion panel and evaluating people, it's too late in the gender game to be looking at that point. We need to be looking when we're first bringing women into the organization, when we're helping cultivate their experiences and their opportunities and all that in order to broaden the base so that we're not just looking for the exceptional people in order to meet these requirements, but we're actually looking for, able to bring an optimization model to it rather than, this penetration of the glass ceiling. We're actually able to eliminate glass ceiling by doing that. And so that was basically my personal experience with it. And I thought it was remarkable. I'd also like to say very quickly that none of this solution comes from women. This solution comes from all of us. So we all have to be engaged in this issue. If we think that, okay, I'm all about gender equity, I'm going to incorporate it into all of my programs and everything like that, and that's good, it's simply not enough. We have to look at our personal behaviors all the way through, how we mentor people, how we bring people up, how we interact with people, and find methods, especially on the male side, find methods to accelerate the achievement of these goals for women's equity and inequality. And with that, back over to you, Corey.
Thank you, Mr. Mcfarland. I really appreciate you highlighting some of the internal challenges when we're looking at comprehensively changing the way we look at including more diverse voices in an institution, and then also giving us that great example from working with partner nations and how we understand their context and generate their buy-in and then partner together with them to achieve these overarching goals. So now I want to move on to our next panelist. Ms. Sharon Feist is the first gender advisor to the commander at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and she serves as the principal advisor on women, peace, and security within the Indo-Pacific, and is one of our champions in our DoD WPS community. So Ms. Feist, I want to turn it over to you. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Corey. And I'll just wait a second before the slides are loaded. There's not a lot of them, just things to look at as I am speaking. Perfect. Hold on a second here. Okay, so first, aloha, and I'm delighted to be here and part of this distinguished panel to discuss, on a topic that's both important to me professionally and personally. And I'm Sharon Feist, and I'm the Command Gender Advisor at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. And within some circles, I'm sometimes asked, and also asked with a dose of skepticism, what does a gender advisor mean for the military? And what exactly are you advising me on? And I think inherent to those questions often lie a fog of misconceptions and assumptions around the word gender. But gender, interestingly, and as Bruce just mentioned in his the remarks earlier, can be found at the root of it all. It's the common denominator for women, peace, and security, for cultivating a culture of allyship within security, and for understanding gender dynamics, whether it's in the military workplace or in the battlefield, and in really achieving gender equality. So if you don't understand gender, you won't get the rest of it right. Next slide, please. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes describing exactly how US Indo-Pacific Command then approaches these interconnected issues through women, peace, and security implementation. But before them, I want to provide some context and background for our organization and the Office of Women, Peace, and Security to our audience. First, US Indo-Pacific Command is an operational headquarters, and that means we provide guidance and oversight to all of our military planning, operations, exercises, and international engagements within the Indo-Pacific region, which spans about 36 nations from here in Honolulu all the way to the Maldives. And our Office of Women, Peace, and Security mission is to mainstream a gender perspective throughout everything we do, so that the US military can then develop inclusive security strategies. So we are externally focused on working with partner nations. And we do this in accordance with our Department of Defense strategic objectives as part of our framework and implementation plan, which Lieutenant General Sklenka outlined earlier. And you'll see kind of these three objectives listed here. One is focus internally, which I will focus a little bit more in my remarks today. And then objectives 2 and 3 is focused more externally in working with partner nations, which my colleague Monica Herrera will focus on in session 4. And a very clear point of distinction I'd like to make, though, is that I'm not an equal opportunity officer for the Department of Defense. I'm not a diversity and inclusion officer, and I'm not a sexual assault prevention and response officer. But the longer that I do my job as the Command Gender Advisor, focused on external relations, the more I see the gendered connections and how those specific issues, whether it be diversity, equity, and inclusion, equal opportunity, sexual harassment, and assault prevention, are clearly interlinked and mutually reinforcing to the global WPS agenda. I also believe that the WPS architecture that has been built over the last 20 years and before through UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on WPS, and that's architecture that has been designed and built by the sweat, toil, intelligence, and courage by many of you out there in the audience today, that it can and must be applied to ourselves and our defense culture. And this is why the US Department of Defense implementation plan for WPS has the potential to be transformative. It truly is an inclusive approach to achieve national security objectives. It recognizes that we are imperfect as an organization and must pursue objective 1 as a diverse and an inclusive military force, so that we can effectually and with integrity achieve objectives 2 and 3 with partner nations and organizations. Next slide, please. So cultivating a spirit of allyship within the military begins with cultivating a spirit of WPS. And that starts with understanding and appreciating that word gender, the thread at the intersection of everything, as Lieutenant General Sklenka mentioned in his opening remarks. With our WPS training to military personnel, we teach that gender is socially constructed and that our conceptions about gender vary across time, geographic space, culture, you name it. A gender perspective means understanding that men, women, boys, girls, and gender minorities have unique experiences and therefore unique security needs and interests. So that it's our job then as military members to connect those gender considerations in the environment to our military mission sets. And that's what it means to operationalize a gender perspective. It helps us better understand the security concerns of an entire population, but it also helps ensure that our own forces are used to our maximum potential by ensuring that we have the right mix of people planning, those who are at the decision-making tables, or who are deployed in the field, so that we achieve mission success. So to be an ally, you must have a gender perspective, and you should be ready to apply it through everything you do. Next slide. But being an ally within the defense and security sector is often not easy, and it's not an unconscious effort. In fact, it takes a very deliberate approach. It requires laying a gender lens on top of our existing environmental and cultural analyses, which you can see here in these 5 domains that many of you are probably already familiar with. Cultural norms and beliefs, gender roles, responsibilities, and time use, patterns of power and decision-making, laws, policies, regulations, and institutions, and access to assets. Conducting a gender analysis helps us ask the right questions so we can better understand gender in the context of our environment, particularly the barriers that prevent meaningful inclusion. And we should be asking ourselves these questions, whether we are deployed on a mission or working in a Department of Defense cubicle. Next slide, please. And we have to ask these gendered questions internally, with one important one being, where do my security organizational policies and procedures fall on this gender continuum, as you can see here? Are they gender unequal, gender blind, gender aware, gender responsive, or gender transformative? At the early stages of the pandemic last year, teleworking truly had the potential to be gender responsive, perhaps even gender transformative for the military. It offered flexible schedules, particularly for working mothers. But then the rest of society's infrastructure, social systems of support, gender norms, roles, and expectations did not adapt and didn't right-size the burden on women. So that woman on the lower left with multiple arms there is that in that slide is me. And she's also millions of women. I've taken many meetings with my child on my lap or nursing my child. Sometimes I've made myself visible in camera, and other times I've kept myself muted and camera off. And you might think, gosh, she's a gender advisor. Shouldn't she be normalizing women's experiences more? But it can't just be women normalizing women's experiences all the time. We need men, and we need our male colleagues normalizing these experiences as well. And this can be done loudly through widely recognizing her unique expertise and contributions while multitasking in a remote environment, as well as confronting those barriers that are in her way. Or it can be exercised subtly, checking in on a female colleague, listening, and collaborating on solutions that might support her. And normalizing is but one way towards women's meaningful participation within the workforce. Meaningful participation means women can bring their whole authentic selves to work every day alongside their male counterparts and feel like a respected member of the team. It means that they are afforded the same opportunities for training and advancement. And it means that they have a role in decision-making. It means they not only speak, but they're listened to. And ultimately, it means that women are seen, respected, and valued as equally worthy of inclusion. This is the kind of culture that makes our defense institutions stronger, and one that we seek to cultivate and promote both at home and abroad. Next slide. So while the last slide evaluates policies, processes, and procedures on a gender continuum, this slide is this one is designed more introspectively to assess ourselves, men and women, on where we might fall under the ally continuum as developed by leading consultant Jennifer Brown. So if we're not currently active or an advocate, how should we get there? And I know the rest of my panelists have experiences and inclusive tips, techniques, and strategies that they can share. But I'd again re-echo my points earlier. Let's just start with gender. Unpack what that word means in your context, and then start with a gender perspective. You'll find that you unlock so many things once you do. And it is kind of corny to say, but it is a key to a better world. Once you see gender, you can't unsee it. Next slide. So to kind of sum up here as I kind of close this, these are kind of my key takeaways in cultivating a culture of allyship within defense and security. To be an ally, you must leverage and apply the principles of WPS within your own organizational culture. It is intrinsically linked with diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. You can and you should help with normalizing women's perspectives and experiences within the military workplace. As an ally, however, recognize that the approach that works for you may not work for others. First, women's experiences, contributions, and perspectives are extraordinarily diverse. And second, the type of ally that partner nations or other organizations may need may look differently than ours. And lastly, this is a journey. It is incremental steps, and you have to earn that ally title. So be careful of calling yourself an ally until someone actually calls you an ally. We all have an equally important role to play in advancing gender equality, men and women, but at the very least, let's do no harm. We should not be reinforcing a system that perpetuates harmful gender stereotypes and that continues to make women invisible. Thank you, and thank you for being part of this conference, to all of our panelists and audience members, and I look forward to questions at the end. Over back to you, Coy.
Thank you, Ms. Feist, for that comprehensive overview of how you reconcile these relationships between these internal aspects of women, peace, and security, and really modeling those principles, and how that translates into our work with partner nations abroad when we work on them with different issues they may be adapting or struggling with. I think it's a really great point that you make. I remember when the Department of Defense first started working on women, peace, and security, and we were really only looking at it from a diversity, equity, inclusion perspective, but we kept getting pushed over in that direction. And I think now we've really gotten to a place of understanding where we've embraced that we have to model our women, peace, and security principles so that we can act credibly when we're doing activities abroad with partners. So I now want to turn over to our next panelist, who is Dr. David Smith. Dr. Smith is the co-author of the book, Good Guys, How Men Can Make Better Allies for Women in the Workplace, and an associate professor at the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Smith.
All right. Well, thanks, Corey. And really thank you also to Sharon and Bruce for really kind of setting the context here today for this great conversation. And I love the fact that we're talking about allyship from a cultural perspective, because at the end of the day, this can't be something that we're checking a block or it's really performative in nature. We have to make real cultural change here for this to stick and to make a difference. And it's great to be here with you, and I'm glad you included me today. And I just want to share a few thoughts to maybe bring this back down into maybe a little more of a micro perspective in terms of allyship. And one of the things that was clear and why I started doing work in this area as a sociologist, I do a lot of work in the area of gender, work and family. So thinking about gendered perspectives on career and work, and how does family intersect with that? And my good friend and colleague at the Naval Academy, Dr. Brad Johnson, he and I teamed up to start working together on this probably about 10, 11 years ago now. And we focused initially on mentoring and sponsoring the advocacy components in terms of allyship. And because we all know these are career developmental resources, but we also know that through the research that access to these resources is not equal. And there's serious inequities when it comes to gender and other forms of diversity around these. And this is part of, how we're going to begin solving and creating more equity and parity in the world today. And that led to our first book, Athena Rising, How and Why Men Should Mentor Women. And, one of the things that struck us was that the fact that the minute you put the term women or gender on a leadership initiative or a women, peace, and security resolution and work like this, that often as men, we tend to check out and just tune out on the topic because we go, oh, that's about gender, it's about women, that's not about me, and I don't have a role there. And it's quite the opposite, actually, that men, we do. And this really is, we like to contextualize this more as a leadership issue, that we as men and women have to work together, right, to accomplish and to change and to create these cultural transformations that we're looking for to be successful. It's interesting that book came out in 2016. About a year later, of course, Me Too went widespread around the world. And this is where we got pulled into a broader conversation about allyship and how not just around the very specific areas of mentoring and sponsoring, but how do we as men in particular show up and engage in doing this work and thinking about how do we show up in all the different workplace environments that we are in and the kinds of relationships that we have in advancing gender equity. And what does that look like? And what do women say they most appreciate about that? And so that led us to the research for our latest book, Good Guys. And I'd like to just share a few thoughts about what we found in the research and maybe ways that we can think about how what's helping us to move forward and what's keep holding us back a little bit and how we can overcome some of that. And you heard, I think, very clearly today from several of our speakers already, and Dr. Hudson and General Sklenka, and about the benefits. And we know that the research is, again, really clear. The evidence is resounding out there about what happens when we involve women in every aspect of national security. So I don't think there's any question about that. And I think even at the micro level, we also heard a little bit about the fact that, hey, you know what? Organizations are more successful. We make better decisions. We're more profitable if you measure it in terms of profits. And we even have, are more successful in terms of mission accomplishment, mission success, when we have, again, women involved at every level, not just at the bottom, but all the way into the senior leadership teams of all of our organizations and our governments today. And so I think it's important to recognize that, that research is well known and it's been around for a long time. But we still find that women are excluded in so many ways, right? Despite the fact that we understand this. And, it's interesting when we did our research for Good Guys and talking to senior men, and we did talk to quite a few in the military and national security organizations out there, that most men, believe it or not, believe in gender equity. They believe in gender equality. Yet we still find that women are excluded in all these different ways. So the question is why? Why is that? And because one of the things that the research also tells us is that when men are involved in doing the work around diversity and inclusion, it makes a difference. We actually see progress. We see this is where the needle really begins to move. And the research, like for example, from Boston Consulting Group, they did a study just a few years ago where they found that in organizations where people saw men involved in particular in doing this work, that they were 96% more likely to be successful in achieving their objectives and really moving the dial on inclusion. Whereas when they didn't see men involved, they were only 30% likely to see a movement here. So it really makes a difference when men are involved in doing this work. But we find that there's this gap, this allyship gap is one way to think about it. But it's really about thinking about this idea that I believe in it, yet am I doing everything that I can possibly be doing? Am I effective? Am I achieving the results in accomplishing this? And again, the research shows us that despite the fact that most men believe they're doing everything they can to achieve gender equity and equality, that we're not actually achieving it. And part of the reasoning behind that is a lack of awareness. It's really hard to fix problems that you don't understand, you haven't experienced, and you're just not aware of. You don't see the problem. And leaders told us that if I don't really see the problem, how can I fix it, right? And so I think one of the solutions here we have to think about is how do we continue to develop awareness through the WPS agenda. The other part of this is feedback and holding ourselves accountable for the results. These cannot be just nice words. Can't be performative in nature. We actually have to have real metrics, real objectives that we're holding leaders accountable for achieving out there. So having the feedback mechanism is really important. And that can happen on a global scale, and that can happen on a micro individual leader scale in a variety of different ways. But we have to be open to getting that feedback. And the last part of this is really about best practices. So many senior men, CEOs and leaders and NGOs out there told us that, what I really am lacking, I believe in this, I want to accomplish it, but I'm really lacking is what are the best practices? What are the things we need? A community, right? This is back to the cultural change. We need a community of allies where we're sharing this information to accomplish this, and we're learning from each other. And when we make mistakes, we do the same thing, because these create these aha moments out there that are really important. Yet there's a variety of different things that, again, that are holding us back. And, again, if we don't get individual leaders engaged in doing this work, it's really going to be hard to create the change. And we know that, when we wrote our first book, Athena Rising, there were so many reasons that, in particular, men were hesitant or reluctant to engage in close mentoring relationships with women, that we call this the reluctant male syndrome. And it's everything from perceptions, gets into implicit bias about, women aren't strong enough, they're a risky investment in some way, so we don't invest in them. It could be we don't see them as strong enough leaders. A lot of men told us they had a lot of anxiety about having a relationship with a woman at work, a close mentoring relationship or a collegial relationship at work. And then there were issues around perceptions too, concerns about perceptions of what will people think or say, if I start spending a lot of time working with women, oh my gosh. And then Me Too, of course, became a factor. And we know the research, post Me Too has shown that men are 60% less likely, if these are senior men, to engage in everything from mentoring to going out to lunch, having coffee, traveling, just providing feedback and counsel, all of these things. And so it's moving us in the wrong direction. But, if my colleague were here today, Brad, he would tell you as a clinical psychologist, there's only one solution to this anxiety. And that's more exposure. We need exposure therapy, more interaction, more coffee, more working together, more of these relationships to overcome some of this. And, it's interesting that, Me Too, of course, there were a lot of false narratives that went around as well. And men were largely responsible for perpetuating these. But I think it's helpful to just reset everything and remember what Me Too was all about. And that is that women want to come to work and not be harassed or assaulted. I mean, it's a really low bar for us as guys to get over, and we can do a lot better than that. And then we have to push back on these false narratives that women are somehow scary or dangerous, or that they're spreading false accusations about, sexual harassment. It's like, no, there's no evidence to support any of that. These are just false narratives that we as men are perpetuating. So as guys, we've got to begin to push back on that and take ownership of these same issues, because it's part of our responsibility and accountability as well. I think it's helpful, and just my last couple of thoughts here, it's helpful to remember what allyship is. And I love the fact that, Sharon presented there and talked about, and even used Jennifer Brown's work, and Jennifer's a wonderful colleague of ours, that, we talk about this in terms of a continuum, but, what are the specific behaviors? What does it look like? And I can just tell you that we look at it kind of in three main areas. And the first is interpersonal allyship. And this is what, again, from a gender perspective, many men would tell us that this is really kind of the easy part of allyship, because it's me holding myself accountable and how I show up in the workplace and the kinds of relationships I have with women at work, and how supportive and collaborative and collegial I am, and developing these good, trusting relationships and supporting gender fairness and equity in the workplace. Really pretty easy for us to individually hold ourselves accountable. They said the hard part is public allyship. And this is where now it's not just me that I have to hold accountable, but now I have to hold others accountable. And this is my teammates, it's people in my organization, it's my leadership, and then eventually it's my organization. And this gets to systemic allyship. And this is where, again, we make cultural change, where we begin to, as we see where bias exists in our everyday practices or our process or policies we have to, because where bias exists, this is where inequities are created. Things like why we don't have enough women in senior leadership positions, why there's a pay equity gap across the world today. It recreates itself through bias in these very systemic issues. And so as we see where those are, we have to begin to think about, how can we change that? How can we create different practices to make it more equitable for everyone, and understanding how people experience the workplace differently? I'd also like to remind everybody that, gender allyship, and we're focusing here from a gender perspective, but women, like men, we're not a monolith. We all have very different experiences, and part of that is from a cultural or intersectional perspective as well. And remembering that, women of color may have very different experiences than white women, and thinking about, gender allyship skills as being more of kind of gateway skills. So that continuum that Sharon showed, from a gender perspective, maybe I feel very comfortable, and maybe I'm way out there on the right side of that, on the advocate side. But maybe when it comes to race or disabilities or sexuality, maybe I'm not as comfortable, maybe I'm not as aware, maybe I'm not as active. And so I can be in different places on that continuum based on different dimensions of diversity, but the allyship skills translate across the board. The last thought I want to leave you with is that, in particular, allyship really begins in the home, especially when we're talking about gender and the focus here. And why is that? Well, because a lot of all the norms of behavior, the cultural components of this, the stereotypes, these are all perpetuated and created through socialization at home. And if we don't start at home, we're probably never going to completely finish creating gender equity in the workplace. So we have to think about that from a cultural perspective too, about how that affects various cultures out there. And we just know from a Western perspective that, women do 2 to 3 times as much of the unpaid labor in the home. And that's true across the board as we think about other countries and certainly other societies out there, that these vary quite a bit. But again, we see there is some consistency when it comes to that. And it's not just the unpaid labor, it's also the emotional, cognitive labor that goes into the tracking of lists and keeping who does the planning and organizing for different things. And, if we don't, as men, support our partners, if you happen to be partnered with a woman, we don't support our partners at home, it's really hard for them to excel in the same way that we as men have the opportunity. And the last part, the socialization, really starts with your children. And we know from the research that when men are engaged as parents and as fathers in their children's lives and the emotional bonding and relationships, that it makes a difference over the long term. And we see with our sons, they have a more inclusive perspective of gender roles and how they combine those when they get into the workplace. And then for our daughters, they're more likely to persist in their career goals and dreams and go into more non-traditional professions and industries. So if we're going to get the gender parity, we've really got to think about the next generation too. So thanks for your time today. And I'm really looking forward to the Q&A and having a great conversation with everybody. Back to you, Corey.
Thanks, Dr. Smith. It is always a pleasure to hear you speak. And every time I hear you speak, I keep saying to my head, yes, that's perfect. Exactly. I really appreciate your sort of look from the macro level individual to the micro to macro. I really appreciate the emphasis on sort of the important role of men in this, where it's not just something that women need to work on, but men pushing back on false narratives and taking ownership of these issues. And really narrowing it down to some of the specific behaviors that folks can action when they go back home to their own organizations. So we're going to keep this panel going, and I would now like to introduce Group Captain Michael Carver. Group Captain Carver is the UK embed to the US Indo-Pacific Command. Group Captain Carver, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Corey. And thank you all for the opportunity to be on this panel today and to express my view on allyship and the roles of WPS in defence. I don't profess to be a true expert in the WPS field, but I am an enthusiastic amateur. And consequently, I approach today by starting right from the beginning. First, I looked at the definition of allyship, the state or condition of being an ally, supportive association with another person or group. And then I reflected on what defence does. In my view, it protects the homeland and by extension, its interest from threats. So given that the threat to be existential, defence needs to ensure that it's the best it can be. We owe this to those whom we defend. In my view, it does not matter if the practitioners are black, white, male, female, or even Labradors. The only criteria must be that we don't preclude ourselves from both selecting and achieving the very best we can. Therefore, if we don't fully embrace equality, we are never going to be able to properly exploit the opportunities offered by diversity, because we'll have a limited field. I think this places a task on defence to be a supportive association to all people and groups, in order to ensure we maximise our talent and effectiveness. In my view, it is how this is done that will define its success. My early career experience was the term allyship was more associated with things like NATO, international agreements, and working with foreign partners. What I think has changed, and continues to do so, is the realisation that allyship starts much closer to home. Certainly in the UK Air Force, I've witnessed a highly effective drive towards promoting gender equality through a consistent aim to eliminate discrimination and embrace diversity. In a non-discriminating environment, gender equality will truly exist and diversity can flourish, the product of true allyship. If our forces don't reflect the society that they represent, how can they possibly expect to reach out to others? I think this is crucial because if we are to use terms like force for good and campaign legitimacy, then we have to ensure that we've addressed our own issues before presuming to address those of others. If we are to claim that we're representative of the values of WPS, then we have to build trust internally and externally. Trust is important. It is hard won and easily lost. If we are to have credibility in our claim that we genuinely aspire to the right thing by all people, then we must start from the right place. In this, gender equality is a key area because by definition, if it does not exist, then we potentially discriminated against 50% of society. How can we possibly claim that aligns with our values? Therefore, we must continue to promote and strive to achieve diversity and gender equality within our militaries. This sounds obvious, but in my experience, many of the implied tasks can be missed. Simplistically, this can be seen as tackling discrimination, but it runs much deeper than that. It is cultural. An example of this was some unofficial middle management advice that I experienced not too long ago. It was an attempt to give guidance on the do's and don'ts of how to treat a group of females that were coming to work with us. Undoubtedly, this is well-intentioned, but when you unpack it, the implications about our behaviour do not paint us in a good light. For me, the so what of this was, training is helpful and possibly was a catalyst to type of transmission, but it's education, true understanding that really leads to cultural change. Achieving this, I think, takes a continuous and determined effort over a prolonged period. As I said earlier, I've seen this in action and it works. In my experience, in defense, we already have an effective enabling structure in place because military regulations are written to accommodate the whole force. Therefore, their consistent and proper application should be effective at preventing discrimination. This places a clear implied task on every leader to ensure discriminatory behaviours are dealt with appropriately. In the UK, we've adopted a zero tolerance approach to this, and it's definitely benefited us. By doing this, we've made this everyone's responsibility because the standard that you walk past is the standard that you accept. Therefore, not to take appropriate action is unacceptable. So therefore, looking outside our structures, I believe that these values can also be an aid to unlocking a conundrum of conflict resolution. I'd like to refer back to the idea that gender split in society is roughly 50-50. Is this metric actually misleading? How much of childcare is associated more with women than men? In many societies, the burden falls more to women. Therefore, the WPS lens offers a means to focus on the majority of society, not just half of it. If we can successfully reach out to this societal majority, this must be a force multiplier and a winner of hearts and minds. By implication, USNCR 1325 recognises this and provides a framework from which to enact it. For me, as a military planner, this is potentially very helpful, as examples of successful conflict termination in modern history are very limited. Beyond the Malaysia conflict of 1948 to 60, I struggle to think of many successes. So any opportunity to improve how we operate must be seized upon. So how can amending our approach to embrace WPS help? I'm not under the illusion there'll be a magic bullet, but given that WPS offers the opportunity to reach out to the majority of society, do we have any choice but to embrace it? To realize this, the first task must be to understand the roles of women in societies that we interact and intervene in. These may not be the same as in ours, but whatever our view on that, we must attempt to understand them. Successful achievement of this approach may well require cultural change. Traditionally, in the military, we tend to focus on warfighting operations and regard peacekeeping and peace building as a secondary role. In the past, we may have got away with this to an extent because the conflicts are limited. But in a changing and uncertain world, state-on-state warfare has once again become a possibility. In my view, this changes the hard power warfighting versus soft power peacekeeping debate, because in a resource-constrained environment, not seizing every opportunity to move away from hard power is folly. There's little that a peer adversary benefits more than seeing you stuck in forever wars. Put simply, war is expensive, and to preserve scarce assets, we should do all reasonably can to avoid it, and if this is not possible, end it as well as we can. Put another way, soft power can be a powerful weapon and definitely has a place alongside hard power. This is especially true given our record on conflict termination. So what role do I see WPS has in this? Well, unfortunately, mankind will keep finding reasons for conflict. But if we can reach out to the majority of society and improve their security, this must be a step in the right direction. In my experience, if homes are stable and children are properly cared for, then peace has a much better chance. WPS offers opportunities to realize this. That said, this is much more easily said than done, but our previous track record tells us we must do this to take every chance of success. To achieve this, I advocate a bottom-up approach. Recognizing the military lever is normally not the only path of conflict, and potential long-term solutions lie with other areas. We must do all that we can not to worsen the chances of the other levers that help assist with conflict. For me, this starts with effective gender equality education of our personnel at all levels, from the deliverers to leaders, both in peacetime and war. The values don't change. If our actions in conflict are cognizant of the requirements of peace, that must be a good start point. If we have a strong understanding of the benefits that a successful WPS agenda can bring, then we may have a much better chance of realizing the goals. An example of this is the rule of law, fundamental to any society, both in conflict, through the law of armed conflict, and in the aftermath. If the worst affected civilians in conflict tend to be women and children, and combined they make up more than 50% of the population, how can this not be a focus? Take Iraq in 2003. If it is accepted that rule of law is fundamental to a functioning society, and that women and children are amongst the most abused civilians in conflict, why did we set out to completely dismantle the Iraqi security architecture? What price a locally manned and aware police force in the aftermath of a conflict? Peace is only peace if it is for all. There's no such thing as half peace, there's just lesser conflict. When we enter a conflict, especially a war of choice, this must be central to our conduct from the off. Otherwise, how do we give UNSCR 1325 teeth? Turn this argument around. Rather than see women as the victims in conflict, how about supporting and enhancing their roles in society and by extension conflict? A good example of this is the UK experience during the Blitz in 1940. The German bombing campaign in the summer of 1940 switched from the RAF's airfields to cities, the calculus being that this would break the will of the people. Given the forces of those days were almost totally male-orientated and the men were away fighting, the majority of the population that was being targeted was female and children. Rather than break spirits, history shows something rather different happened. The civilians, as I said, a high proportion of women and children, were tougher than the enemy anticipated. Rather than breaking wills, the bombing galvanized them, with the result that the iron will of a predominantly female workforce literally kept the country going. Hard power would have been severely, if not fatally, undermined without decisive intervention for what erroneously been identified as a societal weakness. Jobs that were formerly male only, from arms manufacture to coal mining, the delivery of aircraft to running farms, were taken on very successfully by women. In today's world, those jobs may seem unsurprising, but at the time, this was very significant. The real point here is look at what can happen if we open our minds to allyship. In this case, women's allyship to men. If women's influence at home is so great, why wouldn't it be the same in other nations? I'd contend it is. Coming forward to more recent times, the Boudinville Conflict of 1988. A key lesson of this conflict was that the leadership role of women in Melanesia was not understood. Consequently, it took too long to empower and utilize matriarchal society effectively. Ultimately, women played a, if not the, key role in the peaceful resolution of the Civil War. Had there been a greater understanding of the issue of women, how much more quickly could this conflict have been resolved? And I believe this was a key lesson that the intervening nations learned after the event. In conclusion, as I started with, I'm a firm believer that WPS has an important role in defence. And I hope they've been effective in expressing this, because going forward, I believe that we have to keep striving to do this better. Thank you.
Thank you, Group Captain Carver, for those remarks. I'm super appreciative that you were able to explain and provide some examples on the linkages between WPS, allyship, and how this connects to military operational effectiveness, and importantly, sharing some examples from your own experience in the UK. So thank you. So we're now going to turn over or transition into our question and answer session. We've had a lot of great remarks from our panelists, and I know that there's a lot to think about. I hope everybody's been sort of reflecting on the different remarks that we've heard. And let me just give you a quick rundown of the rules of engagement for submitting questions. You can either do it through the question and answer function in the Zoom chat, or you can ask a question verbally by raising your hand with the raise your hand function. And I'll call on you to answer the question. So we have about maybe 20 minutes left. I do want to be conscious of time because at 45 after, we're going to have a very important break. So I will stop there and open up the chat to start answering questions. Fantastic. And I think I already see one from Whitney. So Whitney asked, When I teach or conduct a workshop on gender, I find that first, undoing some of the demonization of men is essential to help men and women build an understanding and acquire the gender lens in a more honest and less biased way. It would be interesting to know how, if at all, this tactic has been applied to the DoD or another military organization, and if so, how it's been successful. So, Ms. Feist, I want to defer to you on this one as the Indo-PACOM gender advisor, but I would also, with Dr. Smith's teaching background and even Group Captain Carver, gentlemen, I'd also look to you all as well if you have any comments to answer Whitney's question. So over to you first, Sharon. Ms. Feist.
Thanks, Whitney. Actually, that is a great question. And I would say yes, to an extent, we do teach about harmful gender stereotypes and norms, and that we don't wish to perpetuate those, whether they be gender stereotypes of men, women, boys, girls, gender minorities as well. And we also do, interconnect that a little bit with, sort of unconscious bias training. Within the Department of Defense, particularly those who are focused more on diversity and inclusion issues, they do more of that unconscious bias training that will focus a little bit more on the stereotypes that you are addressing right there. I would also caveat to kind of keep in mind the audience within the Department of Defense and that it is predominantly male. So from the Women, Peace and Security perspective, we do make a concerted effort to be focusing on women and leveraging, obviously, that wide pool. But because, as Corey mentioned, there are a lot of behavioral characteristics to your question, I'll also kind of open it up to my colleagues on the panel.
Dr. Smith or Group Captain Carver, any additional thoughts to add, or we can move on?
I'd just add that interesting word, demonization. I mean, I think one of the things that I would suggest here is that perhaps, yes, we can focus on things that have happened that aren't good, but also I think we should also bring out things that are generally reasonably good. I mean, away from the DoD, a lot of couples, male and female, live together perfectly successfully. If that is so, men can't be entirely bad. So I think we should also look at the positives. And I think one of the ways to get around this is perhaps not to overly focus negative, but look towards the positive. For example, as I said earlier, look how we have made strides in certain militaries, certainly I can speak from UK experience, in how gender equality has come forward. So there must be a will there. So not all men can be bad. So I would just say, yes, there may be a bad start to a story, but I think the ongoing narrative is the place to focus, and perhaps that'll alleviate the problem it brings.
Just two quick thoughts I'd add to that. First, I think we're getting to kind of the blame shame game, as we like to call it, that, when you blame and shame people for behavior, it does not necessarily create or affect the change that you're looking for. If we're really trying to influence behavioral change, we have to be more aspirational. I think that's what Group Captain Carver was getting at. We're trying to find all right, how can we be better at this? And, one of the things from a DoD perspective, I think it's interesting that the research backs up is I think there's a movement afoot to make this, more integrated into education. And I think the best practice of this that we find from the research is that if you're trying to really create cultural change and behavioral change in large organizations and enterprises such as national security, that having one-off trainings and things are not as effective. And the research is pretty clear. Unconscious bias training is one of those, in particular, that if it's not integrated into your role as a manager, as a leader, as whatever your role is, it's likely not to have the positive effects that we're looking for. But when it's integrated in, for example, into like leader development programs, highly successful, right, in creating the change that we're looking for. When it's integrated into mentoring programs, highly effective in creating the change that we're looking for. So the implementation is really important in how we do this. And I think that's one of the important parts of WPS, is that we're really focused on the implementation and how we do it.
Dr. Smith, I want to kind of pull that thread a little bit, because I think when we talk about implementation, we're also talking about specific actions that we can all take. And I know that some of your research has really unpacked some of the great bystander intervention and skill sets that we all can do, but more importantly, men in male-dominated organizations can also do to create that sort of enabling environment and cultural change that you all have highlighted in this panel. So I was wondering if you could give us a few more specifics that you've learned or practiced or taught in your experience for the audience.
Yeah, happy to. And I think we can look at this in kind of back to how do we think about allyship, and from an interpersonal perspective. One of the things that we heard over and over again in the research for both books was that what women most appreciated from an interpersonal perspective was really great listening skills, and that they wished, again, there was more focus on this and what it looked like to be a great listener, because this is really about how we develop awareness and understanding of issues. And in particular, women told us that these male mentors or allies of theirs, they listened in a way that they called it generous listening, and in a way that showed that they were really trying to understand, and they weren't trying to listen for a problem and to fix it. Because a lot of times people don't necessarily need to have a problem fixed. They want to be validated. They want to see that their experiences are normal, that this really did happen, or be a sounding board, just somebody to listen to or bounce ideas off of. We don't necessarily need to be there, I think, to fix people. And so great listening skills was one of them that I think we've got to have more of. And then the ability to receive feedback in a positive way. And I think this is, again, back to how do we close the gap in understanding what we're really achieving. And we have to be able to have trusting relationships. Men have to be able to have the humility to understand that, hey, we don't have all the answers when it comes to this. We have a lot to learn. And then I need this allyship with my female colleagues to be able to do this. Some of the men even talked about how they talked about these women in their inner circles as kind of like Sharon, like she's a gender advisor. They called them gender confidants, right? So they were there to help explain when something didn't go the way they expected it to. So today, when you said that during the conference and all the women rolled their eyes, here's why. It's like, oh my God, thank you. Helping us to understand the blind spots that we have so we can be more effective, right, in achieving and accomplishing what we're trying to do there. And so lots of these little interpersonal things, and just developing a situational awareness of, what's going on when we're in group dynamics and group settings out there, meetings. It could be virtual meetings like this, or it could be in person, like you're going to hopefully have tomorrow, right? That, who's in the room, who got invited. We can look here, even in the Zoom room today, and look at the Hollywood squares up here of who's in my picture frame right now, who got a speaking role today, who got more airtime today, who got interrupted 3 times as often, who had their ideas valued, and who had their ideas stolen. Yeah, and by the way, guys, that's called bro-appropriation, when we steal women's ideas. It's so rampant that women have names and terms for this stuff that as guys, we often are not aware of. And so there's this level of awareness in the interpersonal that's really important. The public side, really important that we begin to be better public advocates for people who don't look like us, and that we're also disrupting what we would call the status quo, and confronting in situations where we hear bias, we hear sexist comments, we hear these jokes that are made, and not accept the fact that often as men and the culture that we're in, we'll make excuses for each other. You go, oh, you're just being too sensitive. And we'll gaslight women like, oh, he didn't really mean that. Or, oh, he's just trying to be funny. And it's like, no, that's not acceptable. And I didn't find that funny. And that's one of the other things as men we have to do is begin to start with I statements. And when we confront and disrupt, and we hear these things, make sure that I didn't find that funny. That's not what we do here. I don't appreciate it when you say these kinds of things, right? So we use I statements, and it's not that, oh, hey, don't say that because Sharon's in the room. Nope, can't do it that way. You have to own it as an ally. If you're a true ally, you will own this and make sure. And it's more effective, especially when it's men confronting other men. And I think one of the challenges we have is that we're afraid that, somehow we're going to violate our bro code or lose our man card over this whole thing because I'm confronting another guy. And it's like, but actually it's more effective when we as men will work with each other in doing this. Because we know that women are much more likely to be penalized when they do it. And as guys, we don't see that penalty, despite the fact that there's a lot of fear about doing the confronting. And the advocacy piece, got to do lots of it. And I think there's a great pledge out there that a financial organization in the US came up with. They were recruiting all of these talented women coming in the front door. They just weren't promoting and retaining them at the same rate that they wanted to. And so they asked senior men in the organization, we want you to take this pledge. And it was a 35-1 pledge, 36 minutes a week, 30 minutes getting to know a talented junior woman, getting to know her career dreams or goals or aspirations, how it might help in helping her to advance that. Spend 5 minutes a week acknowledging and congratulating a woman on a win or an achievement, an accomplishment she just had. And then spend 1 minute a week talking about that woman and that accomplishment in circles where she's not there in the room, right? So we can be advocates even when she's not in the room. And I think this is the true litmus test for us: is how do we as men, how are we a raving fan or loudly sponsoring women in this case when they're not there? So anyway, just a few ideas.
Just a few ideas, Dr. Smith. That was a dissertation of ideas. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your last comment right there about, advocacy for people when they are not in the room and advocating for their inclusion or their perspective based on, a previous interaction or engagement. I think, when I was a gender advisor at AFRICOM, I think some of my biggest and best advocates for both women, peace, and security as a program and initiative, but also just sort of making sure that I was included in some of these important meetings to help advance our WPS efforts, were from many of my male colleagues who would say, go get Corey, make sure Corey's here, and advocate for me when I may have been left off the distro unintentionally. And so I've always been very appreciative of those allies who step up and show up for you when you're not there to advocate for yourself as well. So thank you for that comment. I did want to, so I saw a question from Mark come in, and Mark, I'm going to do a little bit of paraphrasing here. Mark asks, how do you gauge that you've created an enabling environment? And kind of specifically, what are some of the indicators that would tell you that you are creating an enabling environment or on a path towards creating an enabling environment? And so I wanted to, get the perspective from USAID over here with Mr. Mcfarland. I was wondering if maybe you could share USAID's approach to this, since you guys have a long history of working and contextualizing this information. Can you share some of those indicators with us?
Sure. And I guess the lesson that we learned is that we gather data, indicators of ease of doing business, of licensing for businesses, things like that. And the big lesson that we learned is that we got to gender disaggregate that data. So all of our data ends up being gender disaggregated. So when we bring it in, and that's how we discover things that we didn't see happening. So if small businesses are having trouble getting licenses, are those small women-owned businesses? Are they male-owned businesses? Things like that. If it takes 6 months to get up and get capitalized, is it women's businesses? Is it males' businesses? Things of that nature. Child nutrition. Is the child male or female? We find that all of those basic data sets need to have a gender lens to them in order to look deeper into the issue or into the problem that we're trying to study. So, one of the other thing that I was trying to say before too was we can look at the large effects and say, if you're sitting in a boardroom and, there's no women in the boardroom, you say, well, that's a large effect. You got a problem there. But there's a lot of really, really subtle elements to all of this that is so difficult to suss out. And that's why things like the Women, Peace, and Security programs are so important. Is it's not about just simply identifying, those things that should be obvious to us, but also trying to find what are the underpinning causations that are there. And so all of that requires a depth of analysis and a depth of study and an understanding that goes beyond just the obvious issues and moves into the more subtle issues that are actually driving these sorts of things.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Mcfarland. I recognize that we are wrapping up on time. I do want to give our panelists one final opportunity. Esteemed panelists, if you could make one recommendation to our audience on how to show up as a good ally, what would it be? I'm going to start with you, Ms. Feist.
Thank you. I think I'd just like to start with first thanking my male colleagues on this panel. And just for the audience's awareness, selection of panelists were carefully chosen. And from my perspective, and also from personal and professional interactions, each has been an ally for our work and for women and for peace and for security. So thank you to all for sharing your insights and providing a more robust understanding of allyship. So in answer to that question, something actionable as an ally, I would start with just being thoughtful and deliberate. And I go back to I'm a little bit of a data nerd as well, but conduct a gender analysis, either a full scale one or a comprehensive one, full scale one or a mini one, depending on the context. And teach yourselves the gender dynamics of any given situation. Ask the right gendered questions. What are the barriers? What are the different rights, roles, and responsibilities within the population? What resources are available to us? Who has access to them? Who has control over them? And what will be revealed really is power dynamics, who has it and who doesn't. Once I think you have this analysis in hand, then I think you should really consult with a diverse range of stakeholders for their perspectives on these issues, especially the women in the room. And listen, because it'll really help ensure that the different needs and priorities are understood and addressed in whatever action that you as an ally decide to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Feist. Dr. Smith, 30 seconds. What's your one recommendation?
Show up, be quiet, and listen and learn. Yeah, in opportunities, look for opportunities to show up where you can listen to women, listen to the experiences, see what needs to happen. But this is not a place for us to take over, right? And the last thing I would say is just, you don't have to call yourself an ally. You don't have to label yourself an ally. Do the work. Show up, do the work. If she calls you an ally, feel good about it. But remember, you're just an ally for that one person.
All right, Group Captain Carver, your turn. One recommendation.
I'd say honestly, this is obviously a journey for us to improve. Therefore, we can't be perfect. So along the way, we must make mistakes. We must point out these mistakes, not be frightened to do so. On the micro, as Dr. Smith said, that's the case of raising a hand. I don't think that was right. Perhaps you should do it differently. On the macro, we have the start and the keynote speech, Afghanistan lessons. What can we learn from this? How can we avoid doing it again? We must take an honest approach and not be frightened to ask difficult questions.
And Mr. Mcfarland, 30 seconds.
Sure. I guess along with Dr. Smith, engage, but engage at a personal level. This is not somebody else's problem. This is not women's problem. This is all of our problem. And we need to engage and listen very closely, because the issues sometimes are big and easy to see, but many times are very subtle and difficult to see. And we need to be prepared, as males especially, to look much deeper in order to see how we can affect those issues.
Thank you. All right, that is the end of our session 2 of Advancing Women, Peace, and Security in the Indo-Pacific Conference. Thank you so much to our panelists for your candor, for your honesty, for your really tangible insights and takeaways. We have a lot to take back with us to our home organizations. Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you for a few logistical comments. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Fleiser, for your excellent moderation of our event. We also want to give a big thank you to all of our panelists and attendees for this insightful discussion.